Peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions and embracing that same heritage that you love so dearly. And it's something only you could do. You achieved a modern miracle, the Arabian way. That's a good way.
And Mr. Prime Minister, I've told Idan and his family everything that you have done to make this possible over the last several days. It was a tense negotiation, and it was critical how you allowed the negotiations to operate, and that's in large part the reason that Idan is home with his family today. How you allowed the negotiations to operate.
Iran must dismantle its nuclear weapons capabilities and must assist in the support of all its proxies. So, with regards to what happens, that's up to the mullahs, to the murderous regime in Tehran. So the shoe is on the foot in Iran, and it's for them to decide whether they will face the full fury of the most consequential president of the modern age, or whether they will say, okay, we give it up.
Issa. Okay. Issa? Yes. Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future, with a more sophisticated approach.
TAIJ. Y'all, welcome back to the show. Thank Allah it is Juma. Guys, we got a lot to talk about because of current events have made the world go crazy. A lot of us are questioning our reality. You're hearing Trump butter up these Middle Eastern sheiks. And I'm saying sheiks on purpose because I want to call them sheikhs or shuyuk. I'm saying it the white way that you'd hear on Fox News, sheiks. These Middle Eastern sheiks being buttered up by Trump, he's giving them a lot of performative speeches, really kind words, even talking about, the failed nation building attempts of the previous administration. And I'd say performatively, not even visiting Israel. But y'all, so many of y'all are falling for it. Look, I'm forced because of this to address our political naivete. We got to go back even and talk about the 2024 election because of all this, guys. Look, I have to talk about our kind of baffling and enduring lack of political engagement. And I also have to re-emphasize how local politics and forcing our own elected officials to legislate is the way forward, y'all. All of this armchair quarterbacking, watching the news, having a cup of coffee, and then trying to figure out if, this group or this country or this bribe happened to make Trump act better, when it's only words and nothing's actually happened. And in fact, if you're really paying attention, you would see Sebastian Gorka out there talking about new hard lines against Iran. Look, I tried really hard to put the 2024 election behind us. And I've proven on this channel over and over again how the American Muslim community didn't have the numbers to swing the election on our own. And we didn't have sufficient numbers in places of consequence, meaning like swing states, to have determined the outcome of the presidential election, again, on our own. I have acknowledged, and I still believe, even more so now actually, that the genocide in Gaza played a key factor in the election. And I mention this because I'm still seeing people blame the Muslim community for the election outcome. Now, I expected this, from smug liberals and establishment Democrats with their whole, if Kamala would have won, we'd be at brunch right now signs. Look, y'all, I should have known better, but I didn't expect the persistence among Muslims blaming one another to be as rampant as it still is right now. And look, I get it. As things get to affect the various parts within the American Muslim community directly, we can expect that, frustrations rise, and each group or subset being impacted by the Trump administration's policies in frustration will lash out at the easiest target. That easiest target, though, happens to be each other. And just remember, just because it's the easiest target, it doesn't mean it's the correct target for your ire. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand how someone out of anger, grief, maybe frustration could have brought themselves to vote against Kamala. I mean, heck, I did. But I voted third party as a protest because I live in Colorado, a state I knew 100% would not affect the outcome of the election. Given that, I even get the logic of an anti-Kamala voter thinking that voting third party wouldn't have been punishing enough. I can understand the logic saying that they need to vote for a GOP candidate to make a statement. But for Trump, personally, I think they were flat out wrong and shouldn't have voted for him. But that's just my opinion. They're free, U.S. citizens, and they're free to vote their conscience. So this is my first point, guys. Look, if you're constantly posting online, I hate the people who empowered this administration. We all do. Probably even the ones who did vote for him, from our community at least. But I can't imagine telling a grieving Palestinian that they should have voted for the party that green-lighted the murder of their family members. Look, slow your roll, y'all. Sometimes you forget, just because of current events, how things were even a few months ago. And to be completely fair to a Muslim who voted for Trump, they were absolutely betting, because I heard them say it, on Trump's megalomania, his impulsiveness, his greed, his arrogance combined with ignorance, and ultimately his ego to make him, unpredictable. And that definitely leads to a chance of progress on Palestine. I mean, we can't argue with that. You contrast that with Kamala Harris and what a Kamala Harris administration would have looked like. She signaled to us in every single possible way that she was not going to do anything different than the Biden administration. I mean, from shutting down Palestinian protesters during her speeches to banning hijab-wearing women from even attending her rallies, to straight up saying she would make our military the most lethal military in the world and saying she would have done nothing differently than Biden. The fact is that even the Biden administration, it was recently revealed, never once pushed for a ceasefire. Never once pushed for a ceasefire. This validates our disbelief when AOC was telling us that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were working tirelessly, or maybe it was around the clock, she said, to secure a ceasefire. Look, those leading this most recent round of blaming the voters, which just, guys, it's never a good idea to blame the voters. I see three broad categories of Muslims in this Muslim on Muslim critics. The ones blaming other Muslims for the way they voted. First are the Democrat loyalists from the Muslim community. And those folks themselves fall into a few categories. Of the Muslim Democrat loyalists, you have some folks who have built some power, influence, or even a career within the Democratic Party at large. And I don't mean necessarily the DNC. I mean like their local Democrat parties throughout the nation. Then there are some party operatives who are elected officials themselves. These folks have a reason to stick with the Democratic Party. But then there's other party operatives who are most often the ones who are the most problematic. What I'm talking about is Muslim Democrat loyalists who are party operatives who are not elected and continue to whisper in the ears of other Muslim leaders. They don't have an electorate to hold them accountable. And just like the DNC consultants who fail and then somehow get promoted and fail again and somehow get promoted because they're serving a cause that's not the actual voter, these Muslims who are influencers and party operatives who are whispering in the ear of our community leaders are hugely problematic because their failure doesn't prevent them from access to power, because none of us are paying enough attention. Look, first and probably most troubling is that these party operatives are the ones who run influence campaigns. I'm talking about people who use our community to build a career for themselves. Or even worse, those who just want to seem important, by having proximity to power. This last group, they're the easiest to identify. They're often the worst too, because they're kind of sellouts for the least, gain, because they'll throw our community under the bus, and just ask for a selfie at a speech or something like that. I mean, these people are aligning with others who are openly hostile to our community or the causes that we care deeply about. I mean, think of the mayor of Houston and the most recent iftar during Ramadan just a few months back. These party operatives sometimes are a bit more complex. Some of them, present themselves as like a political strategist, as an outreach person, as a PR professional, and I'm throwing myself under the bus here because I am a public relations professional. They also come off as online influencers, and a few of them as, pretty famous pundits in the media. The ones we have to be careful with are the ones that can claim legitimately some sort of activist status. I'm talking about people who, may even represent some well-established Muslim organizations. These folks who have a track history of serving our community, advocating for our community, years or even decades of service with groups like CARE, Impact, or other organizations, we need to carefully look at them on a case-by-case basis, because you don't want to fulfill the saying that says no good deed goes unpunished. Now, I'm not saying they always get everything right just because they have a track history of working for the community. What I'm saying is they're different than the people who are strictly political actors, consultants, and strategists who are loyal to the Democrat Party only. Now, let's talk about the pundits and influencers for a moment. Among the influencers, there are those who are very principled. They warned before the election that, voting for Trump would hurt our allied communities. And as a result, they said, and they were right, that it would set us back, not just in our relationships, but in general. And the time is proving them right. I'm even sympathetic to their frustration, but not in the way that some of them are taking their frustration out on the community at large, because it's harming us. And look, I'm sorry. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. If I put myself in the shoes of a Palestinian, or heck, even a Lebanese person, Egyptian person right there in the region, seeing how my people are people who look just like me are being wholesale slaughtered day in and day out and treated as if their lives are worth less than a cow. If I had lost family members, in some cases, I've heard people have lost hundreds of family members. There's no way in the world you're going to make me feel bad for voting against Kamala. Now that the elections are over and the president is normalizing and unleashing the nation's, repressed hatred and bigotry for Black and brown people and for Muslims, we're seeing our civil liberties get trampled on. And in some cases, people are threatening habeas corpus, the right of due process. Somehow, we've decided that instead of blaming the actual perpetrators of the movement to still our civil liberties, those working to establish authoritarian rule over us, we're spending time blaming one another for how we voted months ago? What the fatwa type of thinking is that? It doesn't make any sense. We're seeing social media posts all over the place with people putting up headlines like, "We've got the receipts," and then they'll have a lame picture of that one imam with his little crew at the Trump rally. Look, guys, we are here. Looking backwards, there'll be a time for it when we're not in a full-blown emergency and a constitutional crisis, and our civil liberties and civil rights aren't being actively threatened. Because if you're out there, furthering the narrative, the false narrative, that Muslims votes bought in Donald Trump, you're actively harming our community. You're hurting our community, and it's on false pretenses. We didn't have the numbers. We didn't have the concentration anywhere but Dearborn, but Michigan. And even there, it wasn't enough to cost Kamala the election. So if you're out there, mad because someone voted against the genocide, and now a few months later, this administration's policies is impacting you and your, subset of the Muslim community directly, then quite frankly, you're putting the immediate need of your reality ahead of other people's realities. You're indulging in the oppression Olympics, and all that does is help to keep oppressors dividing us and make it easier for them to oppress us. Look, this all causes infighting and makes resistance ineffective. In essence, if you're out there posting "I told you so" style memes, blaming the community in your commentary, you're part of the problem. You could put the blame on the people actually committing the injustice. Or you could blame the opposition party, the Democrats, for not working hard enough. You could even blame, the media for all their weak reporting. But somehow you and your focus is to blame the very people suffering, from the policies or opposing a genocide. Look, even if that genocide's happening in another part of the world, we can't be resisting fighting, for our own civil rights at home without resisting the genocide. Or what's the point? I mean, if you can't do both, why do anything? So then how are we different from the people who are literally saying their lives matter more than other people's lives? If we're fighting one another over this kind of stuff, we're doing to our own community, our own faith community, exactly what others are doing to us. So what's the point? I mean, look, this is actually why I started this channel. I focus on the intersection of liberty, identity, and civics because all of these things are intertwined. Of course, we all vote and advocate for our self-interest. That's expected. But we do it most often without enough thought or real allyship with others, without a long-term plan. For example, where are all the Muslims running for office right now? Why are we not seeing massive amounts of people putting their money into supporting candidates, having movements to build up candidates from our community for their local races, for their state races, for federal races. This should be the focus of our Muslim community. And if you're out there on doing the easy thing, trying to tear each other down online and calling people out, you're not doing anything but creating more noise and distraction. What we should have learned from this is that we need one another. We need to listen to one another. We need to work together. We need to employ a yes and approach to politics. Yeah, those people who voted for Trump, it was wrong. And we need to keep working together. We need to put our focus on the people actually taking our freedoms from us. Even if we disagree with one another, we can find common ground to fight against, limits on free speech, deportations, ICE abducting people without a warrant. Look, furthermore, recent developments have made anyone sitting there blaming the voters look really kind of ridiculous and stupid right now, especially when it comes to Palestine and the Middle East. Look, I don't trust Trump for a millisecond, and I have no delusions that what he's doing, any of the good things that he's saying or signaling, is for the right reasons. As I've said multiple times, Trump only cares about empowering himself, and enriching his family. I've seen this show too many times not to be cautious and to expect the worst. That said, the Trump administration did lift the sanctions on Syria. He negotiated the last American-Israeli hostage to be released. He helped Pakistan and India reach a ceasefire. If he didn't do it, someone in his administration did it, and he let that happen. He forced a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Temporary? I mean, we'll get into that in a second, but he started direct talks with Iran. He ended the attack on Yemen and acted independently of Israel, for many of these items, which is asserting that our national interest might just be for us and that we'll pursue them in spite of, foreign interests. Now, with all of this, we must acknowledge that he escalated the attacks on Yemen in the first place and likely only pulled out because of the massive cost that it was hitting, billions of dollars, airplanes falling off his ships and whatnot, and the lack of strategic results. And then on top of all of that, our own domestic stockpile of munitions is dwindling to alarmingly low levels. Also, the Trump administration never enforced the Gaza ceasefire or called out Israel for their immediately announcing that they would resume attacks whenever they wanted, or for Israel's multiple violations of the agreement. The administration still hasn't concluded the Iran deal, and attacks and even a full-on war, in my view, are very much still a possibility. As I said earlier, Steve Gorka is out there, rattling the saber now while Trump is still in the Middle East. Look, this could really happen, especially if an attack, by Israel happens. They'll try to force us to support them after the fact. And there are so many ways for all of this to fall apart. I don't think we should celebrate any of it, no matter how flowery the words that Trump spews while he's visiting all these sheiks, again, said wrong on purpose. Look, just like the tariffs, much of the successes that Trump is having is rolling back his own mistakes. We've seen this movie too many times, and we still keep falling for it. It's time we grow up a little bit. And the same is growing up a little bit about the Democrats with the controlled opposition they're offering us. Look, what I can say is there was absolutely zero reason to think regarding foreign policies, things would be better under the Harris administration, if the Harris administration was voted in. In fact, there's very good reason to think Russia and Ukraine would be in a worse place. The Palestinian people would have never even had a brief pause in the violence, and that Israel may have already got us to support them in striking Iran by this time, should Kamala Harris have won. The fact remains, though, that Trump and his administration have on multiple occasions publicly broken with the Israeli lobby and pursued, or at least signaled, policies that, were independent of their influence. And this seems to put American interests first in the region. But what I'll tell you is Trump is only putting growing his personal wealth first. He's not doing America first. Also, I think in a lot of ways, the things Trump is doing appear to be a break with influence from Israel, but might actually be more about him wanting to have a legacy, or at least the understanding or branding of a legacy of ending conflicts. Some sort of strategy to build and wield more authority might be behind it all. He might, be doing this purely out of his own ego, wanting to lead people to know that he's in charge, that kind of thing. or that he won't bow down to influence, even if the influence is paid by the the people that he's rebuking publicly. Look, the future is definitely uncertain, but Trump has proven to be a wild card, and that, at least in appearance, provides the chance that the genocide in Gaza, as well as the escalation of war and conflict throughout the region, could take a different path than we all expect. I say all this to say to those people protesting things about their fellow Muslims, like saying, we've got receipts, claiming that Muslims voted in significant numbers for Trump, really, you picked the worst possible time for that critique and you look stupid. I have to restate this, though. I don't buy it at all. It feels staged. It feels like a bait and switch. It looks like it's designed to get the Abraham Accords back on track. I fear an attack on Iran is looming, and that this would give, an attack on Iran would give Israel cover to intensify their operations in Gaza. Now, to go back to other types of party operatives, that was a long tangent, I'm sorry. In reality, I have no beef with party operatives being on one side of the aisle or the other, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. In fact, I think it's a necessity. The problem comes when they throw our community under the bus for their own advancement or chastise our community publicly for not supporting their party when their party isn't there for us. The most insidious of this and the most problematic is of the Muslim Democratic Party operatives who dilute the Muslim identity, a religious identity, mind you, into an ethnic, cultural, or racial identity, and then push for the advancement of some Muslim people's interest over others. Normally, this happens with Muslim businessmen putting their business interests over issues of justice, for instance. This happens, where I'm from all the time in Houston. In fact, there are several South Asian and sometimes specifically Pakistani leaders who are famous for this. Now, we got to take a break and get back to the party operatives in a different way. You have some that are incredibly effective fundraisers or get out the vote groups, and they rely on the masses of Muslims remaining asleep. And that's why sometimes I think a lot of them actually start with the blame in the Muslim community and keep harking back to this you should have let Kamala win type of narrative. And they will fight against any activist who tries to mobilize the community beyond being an ethnic group, or who tries to get the community to have a more nuanced understanding of politics, to be less aligned with one side or the other. This is the telltale sign that you have someone who may not be in it for your best interest or for the community's best interest. Sometimes, this is because they literally see the empowerment of the Muslim community at large as a threat to their business model. Sometimes it's because they actually have animosity towards the vast majority of Muslims. You'd be surprised how often I've heard quote unquote Muslim political leaders say very disparaging things about the Muslim community at large, normally while protecting their subset of the community. A specific example, though, there is one. In Sugarland, a city council member, his name is Naushad Kermali, he ran for mayor. And he ran for mayor of Sugarland, Texas, where he lost. And all the veils that he had, he simply couldn't help himself from having them fall off. So let's switch over to that video because, guys, there's a lot to say here. Are you ready? Let's go.
I tell you, we live in a racist community. We live in a very racist community. It's unfortunate. The color of my skin got me. The Muslim community failed me. The Indian-American community failed me. Because of politic bullshit that is happening overseas that doesn't affect the city of Sugarland. We have nothing to do with the violence that happens overseas. You don't like me, leave the room. I really don't give a damn.
He really doesn't give a damn, is what he's trying to convince you anyway. Look, guys, politic BS. Is he talking about the genocide streamed in 4K in real time that we see day to day? What, are we just supposed to ignore it because it's politically inconvenient for you? Also note from that clip, everyone else failed him or hated him for no good reason, hence the racism charge. That's why he lost. It surely wasn't because, he never convinced his constituents that he was there to serve the community. I mean, the society was so racist. Were they racist when you won your city council seat? Were they racist when they voted en masse for other brown people? I mean, even Kamala Harris, who has one of the most tin ears of all time, had enough common sense to give us a concession speech, which allowed her to retreat out of the spotlight, which she has done, by the way. And we only hear from her, now and again when, she's trying to fundraise to try to maybe recuperate her losses from overspending in her campaign. But or maybe, every now and again, her proxies kind of float. She'd run for president again, or maybe she'd, like to be the governor of California. And of course, every time the outcome looks terribly negative. But this all gives us, a pivoting point, a way to reflect, which is just like Kamala Harris refusing to listen to the anti-genocide protesters. This Sugar Land City Council member did the same thing, and now he's blaming the voters. Will folks ever learn? Look, you don't blame the voters, guys. You blame yourself. You blame your campaign, or you blame your policies. I'd almost respect this dude if he was morally consistent. Yet simple Google searches showed that he expressed solidarity for Ukraine as an elected Sugar Land City Council member. So let me just say this straight out. Bro, no one failed you. You failed the voters. They sensed you weren't there for them. You confirmed that in your concession speech, your blame speech, that you weren't there to hear their concerns. You weren't there to work for them. And I can't imagine the amount of entitlement that this guy has outside of that short 28-second clip. It really makes me think, like, dude must have been running for all the wrong reasons. He must have been thinking about business deals or something he had in the back end. One of the most recent videos that I go through, is I put this together for my channel, was legislative steps elected officials could be doing to take the fight to the Project 2025 folks and the Trump administration, and their infringement on our civil liberties and their mad dash towards authoritarianism. In that video, I also laid out why we can't rely on Democrats or anyone else really to save us. We have to rely on ourselves. And this brings me to some recent developments that further validate what I'm trying to tell y'all. I'm going to put up an article of it here, and I want you guys to read the article in the link in the description. I want you to meet a young man named David Hogg. He was one of the few rising stars in the DNC, and yes, I mean the Democratic National Committee. He represented really a ray of hope for that party. But, he's just been officially retaliated against. The Democratic National Committee's credentials panel voted to void his February election, the election of David Hogg, to the vice chair at large of the party. What was the official reason? There were procedural violations. If you're getting flashbacks of Bernie being kicked out of the primaries both times and outmaneuvered, I'm with you. Really, though, you see, David Hogg was pushing hard for party reform. He even said he would support primarying incumbents in safe seats to oust underperforming Democrats. Hogg has a compelling story, too. I mean, like, kicking him out is terrible for the party. He was a survivor of the 2018 Parkland shooting. He went on to be the co-founder of March for Our Lives. That's kind of how he got involved in politics. And what was his sin against the DNC? Well, he publicly announced a plan to spend $20 million supporting primary challenges against long-serving Democrats who were in safe districts, but they weren't fighting for their constituents. Here's a quote from him. "I didn't run for this role to protect a failing status quo," Hogg said. "I ran to help fix it." Christine Pelosi. Does that name Pelosi sound familiar? She's a member of the Credentials Committee and the daughter of former House Speaker, Miss Insider Trading herself, Nancy Pelosi, insisted that the vote to void Hogg's election had nothing to do with politics, of course, and it was strictly about internal rules and procedural fairness. And she encouraged Hogg to run again in the re-election coming up. Look, y'all, we need to stop being fooled by performative political stunts. Whether it's tough talk on video that does nothing but, placate you, whether it's Trump whispering sweet nothings to sheiks in the Middle East, to empty words on TV or social media, we have to start training ourselves to look for action. And what do I mean? I'm talking about people like the Democrats who traveled to prisons in South America or visited ICE detention centers in Newark. And those few Republicans, mostly with really hardcore libertarian ideologies like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul, who will ever so cautiously stand against MAGA and that agenda on constitutional grounds. They'll cite our forefathers and, most importantly, look to those elected officials who are introducing legislation or using other legislative movers. People like Congresswoman Permelia J. Paul, who recently acted to protect, people from being deported, U.S. citizens. These are the ones who are fighting to truly restore the Constitution, its checks and balances on power. For a bunch more ideas on how legislative measures and maneuvers could restore our democracy, check the video out, that's at the end here. And then also, be sure to subscribe. It really helps me reach more people. And please share this with your contacts, your friends, so that we can all learn from one another. God bless you all and your loved ones. May we, this audience and the American Muslim community and our allies, make our country respected again. May we help our nation, live up to its highest values. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much.
Issa. Okay. Issa? Yes. Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway, convert to Islam, defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future, the more sophisticated approach